Hey everyone, welcome to this training. In this session, we are diving into the rules that we follow to trade with TrendForce. So I've got my dad with us. He's going to be taking us through each of our rules so that you can follow along again with our system PDF. But otherwise, no further ado, Dad, over to you.
Thanks, Ty. Well, let's jump straight into the rules.
All right, now we're just going to work through the rules. So we basically have three rules. It's an acronym for TAS, T.A.S. T is for TrendZone Alignment, A is for angle, and S is for space. And so with all our signals in this indicator now, the first part of the trend zone is baked into the signal already. And so trend zone means that the trend zone in the main indicator must be bearish for a sell. So there would have been a crossover on that signal. Plus the main trend zone in the MACD also must be bearish and must have had a crossover. You will not get a signal unless you're aligned on the current time frame you're on. I'm on the 3-minute on gold right now. And so we also look for 3 time frames higher. If that happens, then you will get a bright sell signal. That'll be a bright red color. And so in this case, it's dark because we're not aligned on the MACD. You can see the trend zone for the 3 time frames higher on the MACD is bullish because it's green. But then we also look at the high time frame. So in this case, we can see 8 time frames higher is still very bearish. It only crossed over further down the track over there. And so this is not a complete signal, but it's safe to take because of the fact that we got this bearish 8-minute zone. And so trend zone is the first rule, alignment. Then the second one is angle. Now you sometimes can't see the angle that's hidden behind the sell signal, but it looks like it's pointing down. But then we have our table. So if you're unsure, in this case, this table is live, so it's not on the current time we're on. But in this case, this 21 would have been red, showing that it was pointing down. So the table always helps us. So we also look 3 time frames higher, and again you can look on the 8. We look at the 8 usually when we're on the 3, and you can see that color. Dark red would have been pointing down, bright red pointing sharply down. And likewise, if you're doing a buy, you can see the different colors. That dark green is pointing up and bright green is strongly up. And so those are the first 2 rules: trend zone alignment, angle, we look at the angle, then finally space. Now this signal came on a weekly pivot. You can see here there is a little thin orange line. Hopefully you can see it. So but basically that signal, there was a lot of power in the signal. Price would have broken through, so there probably would have been space. We didn't get down to that daily pivot. So those are the 3 things we look at: the trend zone alignment, angle, and space. So we're going to look at an example now of a stronger sell signal where there's complete alignment. Right, now we're going to look at another sell signal. In this case, you can see that the label is bright. That means there's complete alignment on the current time frame and 3 times higher. And so again, the 3 rules, this fulfilled the 3 rules completely. We can see that we got a crossover, obviously generated the signal on the current time frame, and there's also a bearish crossover in the MACD. But what made this one strong too is we can see again, we have a wonderful bearish trend zone, 3 time frames higher and 8 time frames higher, plus price pulled back into that 3 time frames high trend zone to get liquidity. And you can see also in the MACD, we can see the crossover generated in the signal, plus look at this, a nice bearish red trend zone, 3 time frames higher, plus the 8 was also trending. There was a crossover. This would be a very strong signal. If we just mention this, look here, we went right down, that was 170 pips. So trend zones were aligned, plus you can see the angle nicely here. The angle was pointing down. In this case, the 3 would have been red. We can see also, if you look 3 time frames high, you can actually see we're in a downward angle. The trend zone, this would have been the 21, 3 time frames high pointing down. But again, on the 8, that would have been nicely red too. And so the angle was fulfilled on both the current time frame and 3 time frames high. You can see there was a bit of space here. The first pivot was way down here, a daily pivot again. So this would have been a very strong signal to take. Again, we want to see this, I'll call this the golden setup. When you see the current zone, 3 time frames higher, and the 8 separated like that, all in bearish mode, that's very strong. Also on the MACD, look at that. This is really what I call a golden setup, where all 3 zones, trend zones in the MACD, are also very bearish. So these are the signals to look for that are very strong. So that fulfilled the 3 basic rules wonderfully. Next, we're going to look at a buy signal. All right, here is an example of a buy signal, and I'm going to talk about the rules here. So this is an interesting one. So I thought I'd pick one that doesn't quite fulfill the rules, but nevertheless moved up. Let's see, this trade went for how many pips? 130 pips. That was a great trade. So let's look at the basic rules. The first rule, obviously you won't get a signal unless the trend zone on the current time frame is aligned. So we can see here we've got a wonderful bullish crossover, and we've also got a crossover in our MACD that would have generated the signal. Plus we only get signals if we're above the 3 time frames higher trend zone and the 8 time frames higher trend zone. So the signals are way stronger in this version, and also are much more reliable. So basically the trend zone rule was fulfilled here for the current zone, but we can see 3 time frames higher, we can see actually the MACD was in pullback mode and was actually bearish. But again, we look at also the 8, we can see here that the 8 is in a very strong uptrend. So in a sense, high time frames, bully low time frames, that would have given this signal some good momentum. Of course, it ran very, very high. And so it wasn't fully complete in terms of rule number 1, only the current time frame was aligned. But again, 8 time frames high was clearly very bullish, so that would have made that signal safer. Next is the angle. This is an interesting one, but you can see quite clearly the angle of the 21 is pointing down. So right now, if we were looking at a live chart under the 3, this actually would have been red, showing down. And so generally that would have broken that rule. But again, with this version, we can see that 3 time frames higher, this would have been the 21 on the bottom of this wonderful green trend zone, was clearly pointing up. And so when it points down, it means there's a potential pullback. It didn't quite pull back because it did level off. So that didn't fulfill the rules. But again, high time frames, bully low time frames. So although it didn't fulfill the rules, 3 time frames higher was clearly pointing up, and that would have shown on the 8, that would have been green, just like it is now. And also what made this strong was the fact that price pulled into this liquidity zone. These trend zones, 3 time frames higher, carry a lot of liquidity. It dipped in there, we got a signal. Also, there was a buy momentum signal added to that. And so again, the 21 on the current zone wasn't quite aligned, but the high time frame clearly pointing up. And so it didn't fulfill, but it was still okay. Then the final rule is space. Now that was a bit of a problem because we were right below a quarterly pivot here. You can see there's a purple line that price had to break through. So it tested it 1, 2, 3, broke through, almost retested it again. So there wouldn't have been space. So you could have waited and entered after it closed above. And you can see the MACD there was quite strong, bright green, very bullish. So it could have been safe to enter slightly later in this case. So it didn't quite fulfill the rules, but yet price still moved. And the reason for that is, again, we've got this wonderful setup. We've got our 3 time frames higher bullish zone pointing up, and plus our 8 time frames higher trend zone also pulling up. That shows the higher trend was up, which then gave it a lot of momentum to push up higher. And so that was not a strong signal, but still moved because we can see the zones wonderfully aligned. Next, we're going to look at a strong buy signal. Right here, we got an example of a strong buy signal. You can see that the signal itself is bright green. That means strong. So if we looked right now, what produced the signal again, we had a bullish crossover on the current zone. Likewise on the MACD, we also have a bullish crossover. But then 3 time frames higher produced this bright signal. So we can see, obviously here, you wouldn't get a signal unless you're above the 3 time frames higher and the 8, which we got. But you can see, look at this MACD here. We had a crossover way back here, a bullish crossover, and this wonderful green bullish band moving up. So that made this trade, in terms of the trend zone, a high probability trade. Again, if you look at the angle too, we can see, look how steep this angle is here. This 21 is very steep, meaning prices are going to go one way, and that is up. If we're looking at the table now, in fact, it would look just like that. There would have been a bright green circle on the 3 minute, which we're on now, plus on the 8, and also the 3 time frames high. Also, you can see it's beginning to move up, but our table would have also shown us on the high time frame what was happening there. So in terms of the trend zones aligned very strongly, produced the bright buy signal. The angle is strong on the current zone, 3 time frames higher. The table would have told us over here that it was up. And then also finally space. Now we just broke above. There was a daily pivot there and also a weekly pivot here. So on the signal, we were in clear space. So, but again, when you get this setup here where the MACD is completely aligned and we got this very strong bullish trend zone, we can find that price will rocket up. You can see the first real obstacle was the 987. That price hit, bounced down, tested, then broke above. And so that would be an example of a strong buy signal. Right, here's an example of a live signal that's just gone off. We're on gold on the 3 minute. And let's look at this one. It's interesting because of the one rule. So if we look at the basic rules for trend zone, remember you won't get a signal unless the current zone in the MACD and the main indicator are aligned, which we can see the wonderful bullish crossovers. And then 3 time frames high, we can see this is a bright green signal. That means very strong. The reason is because, look at this, the 3 zone higher trend zone is already bullish. So not only only did we have a crossover in the current zone, 3 time frames high is bullish. And in this case, the 8 also, we can see this wonderful, there was a crossover way back, wonderful, strong, bullish 8 time frames higher trend zone in the MACD. Plus, we can see you wouldn't get a signal unless you were above. So we were above. The angle was slightly leveling out there. So we don't know if it had gone to green yet, possibly, but the table would have told us. But again, when you get a bright signal, it's likely to move. So angle was good over there, but you can see again, look, 3 time frames higher, the 21, 3 time frames higher would be at the bottom of this green band. And you can see that definitely on that signal was in an uptrend. So that would have made it safe. The catch here with this one is that space would have been a problem because you can see that the signal came right below the 987, which is very strong for support and resistance. So we can see price came, hit there and bounced off, and you would have been stopped out had you taken that buy signal. So what you would have needed to do was to wait for price to close above this 987 and then enter after that. And so again, this is interesting because of the space factor. You would have got stopped out. That is just showing how important the rules are. If you break that rule of space with something so strong, the 987, you can get stopped out. You would needed to wait, maybe enter on this candle, or you could have even entered. Here is a 8-minute bullish crossover. Even if you got in here, there still was a huge trade. There was the POC in the way, but that trade still moved up. If the candle opened about over here, I mean, in total, it was still 150 pips in that trade. So again, this one shows how important space is. It did break through because of the very strong bullish trend in both our indicators, but remember, space can be crucial. So those are our basic 3 rules: TAS, trend zone alignment. For T, A is for angle, and S is for space. So if you follow those 3 rules, you will be a profitable trader. Look forward to seeing you at our next live training.